Hello ma'am, good evening. My name is Minrit Kipasa and I'm here to talk to you about my topic, that is probability sampling and its types. Here are the contents I will be covering, including its meaning, types which consist of simple, systematic, stratified and cluster sampling, conclusion and the references. Meaning: probability sampling means that every item in the population has an equal chance of being included in the sample. Here it means each individuals in the population should be given equal chance of being included, and that every single individual in the sampling frame has a known and non-zero chance of being selected into the survey sample. And it also means every individual from a population has an equal chance of being selected. So henceforth, we can define probability sampling as a sampling technique in which the researcher chooses samples from a larger population using a method based on the theory of probability. And for a participant to be considered as a probability sample, he or she must be selected using a random selection. Next, probability eliminates bias in the selection process. Like for example, in a population of 1,000 members, every member will have a 1 or 1,000 chance of being selected to be a part of a sample. So in this way, we can say that probability sampling eliminates bias in the population and gives all members a fair chance to be included in the sample. Next, probability sampling refers to sampling techniques for which a person's likelihood of being selected from the sampling frame is known. About this, we might ask ourselves why we should care about a potential participant's likelihood of being selected for the researcher's sample. And the reason is that in most cases, researchers who use probability sampling techniques are aiming to identify a representative sample for which to collect data. And this representative sample is one that resembles the population from which it was drawn in all the ways that are important for the research being conducted. Next, obtaining a representative sample is important in probability sampling. This is important because of generalizability, which is perhaps the key feature that distinguishes probability samples from non-probability samples. Moving on, there are a variety of types of probability sampling that researchers may use, but the most common ones are: number 1, simple random sampling. This is also known as unrestricted random sampling, and it means a sample is taken from a part from the total population by giving equal opportunity for all the individuals. And it can be carried out in two ways, that is the lottery method and random number tables. In lottery method, all items of the universe are numbered or named on separate slips of paper of identical size and shape, and these slips are folded and mixed up in a container and make a blindfold selection of sample. And random number tables. Random numbers are strings of digits that have been generated by the lottery method and can be found in books of statistical tables. Number 2, systematic random sampling. This is a type of probability sampling method in which sample members from a larger population are selected according to a random starting point and a fixed periodic interval. It is also a statistical method involving the selection of elements from an ordered sampling frame. There are also two types of systematic random sampling, that is the linear system sampling and the circular systematic sampling. Linear system sampling is one that is not repeated after the end of the population, and it goes linearly along the population and then stops. The circular systematic sampling starts from the first sample again after it ends. Therefore, it continues in a circular shape. Number 3, stratified random sampling. This is also known as restricted random sampling, and in this type of sampling, The sampling frame is divided into subsections comprising groups that are relatively homogeneous with respect to one or more characteristics, and a random sample from each stratum is selected. The population is first subdivided into stratum, that is, dividing the heterogeneous population into homogeneous unit called stratum. Moreover, stratified random sampling divides the population into smaller groups or strata based on shared characteristics. That is, the strata are formed based on members' shared attribute or characteristics, and then apply the simple random techniques to obtain the representative sampling. Also, it may be of two types, that is proportionate and disproportionate stratified random sampling. So in case of proportionate random sampling method, the researcher stratifies the population according to known characteristics and subsequently randomly draws the sample in a similar proportion from each stratum of the population according to its proportion. Whereas in case of disproportionate stratified random sampling, the sampling unit in each stratum is not necessarily be as per their population. Last but certainly not least is the cluster sampling. This is another type of probability sampling method in which the sampling units are not individual elements of the population, but group of elements or group of individuals are selected as sample. And in cluster sampling, the total population is divided into a number of relatively small subdivisions or groups which are themselves clusters, and then some of these clusters are randomly selected for inclusion in the sample. Like for example, suppose an investigator wants to study the functioning of midday meal service in a district. So in that case, he can use some schools clustering in a block or do without selecting the schools scattering all over the district. So in this way, cluster sampling reduces the cost and labor of collecting the data of the investigator and less precise than random sampling. Also, there are two types of cluster sampling, that is the single stage cluster sampling, in which all the cases in each sample cluster are included in the sample design, and the multi-stage cluster sampling, which involves sampling at two or more steps or stage. Now, to conclude my presentation, I would like to add few more points regarding probability sampling. Point number 1, a probability sampling method allows a researcher to use probability to draw samples from which population parameters can be estimated with a high degree of confidence. Point number 2, probability sampling is simple, cost-effective, straightforward, and also it is non-technical. And above all, sampling is a powerful tool for social science research. It is important and powerful in social research because it helps us to generalize to the population of interest and ensure high external validity. Here are the references. Thank you.